When people talk about corporate injustice, they usually start with how irreplaceable they were, how undervalued, how everyone around them failed to see the obvious. My story begins differently. I wasn't the star of the department. I wasn't a young genius, nor a quiet business savior. I just did the job no one likes doing. Reconciliations, risk flags, reporting, transaction checks, logic in the numbers. And honestly, I was good at it. Not the best, but meticulous. Meticulous enough that it eventually became a problem. 3 months ago, my manager, Rick, called me into a meeting room. A glass box among glass boxes, the kind where even the walls feel like they listen. He sat down, interlaced his fingers, leaned toward me, and used the tone people use when they split the world into us and you. Grant, you need to stay in your lane. No recommendations, no emails to leadership. You do reconciliations. We make decisions. Clear? I nodded. What else was I supposed to do? Argue? In our company, arguing with a manager is like arguing with an escalator, pointless and loud. But I remembered his expression, and the way he said, we, and how strangely tense he'd been whenever Ridgeline Analytics came up in the last few weeks. When I got back to my desk, I did exactly what he asked. Stopped writing recommendations. Stopped sending analysis upstairs. Stopped interfering with their processes. But I didn't stop watching. And almost immediately I saw the first discrepancy. The Ridgeline expense line had doubled, with no explanation. 2 weeks later, tripled. But the strangest part, I wasn't even added to the approval chain, even though I had always reviewed items like this. I asked Rick directly, why did the changes skip my review stage? He didn't even blink. Because it's not your area of responsibility. I walked away from that conversation with the same quiet, icy feeling you get when you watch someone try to hide something in plain sight. I'm not paranoid. I just know how to read behavior. I started pulling old files, checking logs, reviewing approval trails, everything official within my tasks, but with more attention than they expected. And at some point, the puzzle began to form. Ridgeline wasn't just increasing expenses. They were increasing them like someone knew nobody was looking, or like the person who should have been looking chose to look in another direction. But the problem was deeper. When I opened the latest version of our internal forecasting model, the same one I had built 5 months earlier, I noticed something. My warnings were gone. The red risk flags I had placed were simply deleted, and the version history showed exactly who removed them. Rick. Quietly. One parameter at a time. Every day. I wasn't shocked, but I was ready. A week before all of this started, I had made a backup of my model. Kept it offline. Out of habit, not distrust. A safety net you never expect to use. When everything finally aligned, I realized one thing. Rick was covering something up. Not just a mistake. A pattern. The kind that could lead to a 7-figure issue. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday, buried among spam and internal newsletters, an invite appeared on my screen, one I'd never seen before. Emergency review, CFO plus legal. Time, 2 hours from now. Topic, vendor exposure, 9.4 variance. I stared at those numbers for too long. They looked like a warning, not from Rick, from the system. When I walked into the conference room, the CFO was already there. Legal, 2 directors, and Rick, pale, tense, sitting stiffly. On the screen was my file, or rather the version with all the flags removed. I didn't need to ask what had happened. I saw it. I understood it. And I knew exactly what they would try to do next. But I had the copy, the one that could explain everything. And when the CFO turned to me and said, Grant, there's only one correct answer to this question. What happened here? That was the moment I realized that for the first time in years, I'd been given permission to tell the truth. And it was only the first blow. People think anger hits like a punch. In my case, it settled slowly, like dust after someone slammed a door you didn't realize had been closing for months. That meeting with the CFO didn't end with shouting or blame. It ended with something worse. Silence. a kind of heavy surgical silence that means people are calculating, not reacting. When the screen went dark and the directors filed out, nobody looked at me. Not with curiosity, not with interest, not even with suspicion. It was as if I wasn't supposed to exist in that room. Rick stayed behind. He was pretending to organize his papers, but his hands shook. He didn't make eye contact, didn't open his mouth, didn't ask what I had brought or what I planned to say next. That told me more than any question could have. In the elevator, heading back to my floor, I felt something unfamiliar. Disappointment. Not fear, not even rage. Just the cold understanding that someone I trusted with my work, someone who used my numbers to build his own wins, had decided I was more useful silent than honest. The next morning, everything changed. I wasn't fired. I wasn't confronted. I wasn't thanked either. Instead, I was suddenly removed from 2 dashboards, 3 approval chains, and a weekly meeting I had attended for years. No explanation, just access revoked. My calendar, once packed with risk reviews and financial modeling sessions, now had blank spaces large enough to walk through. I asked IT if something was wrong with my permissions. They said the request to restrict access came from management. I didn't need to ask which manager. In most companies, when someone slowly pushes you out, they hide it behind new processes, reorganizations, restructuring plans. With Rick, it was more primitive. He just cut the wires that connected me to the work. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were redistributing tasks. Maybe they were reorganizing approvals. Maybe I was overthinking. But then I saw the Ridgeline numbers again. 2 invoices, submitted less than 10 days apart, each with amounts that didn't match the contract rate. I personally validated 2 quarters ago. Not a rounding issue. Not a proration. Not a legitimate variance. This was someone moving money through the system in increments, small enough to be ignored, unless you knew exactly what to look for. And I did. The problem wasn't Ridgeline alone. It was someone inside enabling it, adjusting baselines, removing flags, and rerouting approvals so the increases looked like organic operational drift. Except operational drift doesn't happen in perfect multiples. I built a private spreadsheet that mirrored the official one. Not a secret file, just my own tracking, something I kept in a personal folder. Every time an anomaly appeared, I added context. Every time a flag disappeared, I marked who removed it. Patterns emerged. Patterns people don't create unless they're trying to protect themselves. Still, I didn't escalate, not because I was afraid, because I understood what would happen if I did. People don't listen to the guy they've already told to stay in his lane, but something else happened I wasn't prepared for. My coworkers started avoiding me, not in a dramatic way, more like they were keeping their distance, as if I carried a quiet contagion. No one asked what happened in that meeting. No one asked about the CFO. No one asked why I suddenly wasn't touching vendor workflows. People aren't stupid. They know when someone is marked. I went from being the person who knew how to untangle a reconciliation in minutes to someone who was suddenly not the right person to ask. They didn't say it rudely. They said it with that corporate politeness that cuts deeper than hostility. By the second week, Rick began checking on me more often. He acted friendly, too friendly, asking whether I had everything I needed, whether I was aligned with the new structure, whether I understood the redistribution of responsibilities. His tone wasn't reassuring. It was almost coaxing, like he was trying to make sure I hadn't talked to anyone. But the more he visited my desk, the more obvious the truth became. He wasn't worried I'd cause trouble. He was worried the CFO would call me again, and then something happened that confirmed it. I received an internal notification that a fresh batch of variance reports was ready for review. Normally, those reports went to Rick first and me second, but this time, the system routed one of them directly to me by mistake. The amount listed wasn't large on its own, just under $280,000, but the metadata told a story Rick hoped no one would ever read. 2 manual adjustments, 4 overridden risk flags, one deleted approval step, one timestamp edited at 2:11 a.m. That number didn't scare me. The timestamp did. Nobody edits approvals at 2 in the morning unless something has already gone wrong. I pulled up the audit log and my stomach tightened. Not because of what I found, but because of what I didn't. The log was incomplete. Someone with admin access had wiped 5 entries clean, and the system doesn't allow that unless you are either a director or someone using a director's credentials. That moment changed everything. Up until then, I had been observing, collecting, staying quiet. Now the silence weighed differently. It wasn't self-protection anymore. It was strategy. Because the second I saw those missing logs, I understood exactly how far this could go, and how much Rick must have feared it. I didn't realize it yet, but that was the moment the ground under him began to shift, and he was the only one who didn't feel it vibrating. The thing about being pushed out is that it doesn't happen all at once. You don't wake up one morning and find security escorting you out with a cardboard box. You feel it drip through your day in small humiliations. By the time the 3rd week rolled around, the office felt different. Not louder or quieter, just wrong, uneven, like I had stepped into a version of my life that someone else arranged while pretending nothing had changed. My desk was still there. My badge still worked. But none of the systems I used for years responded to my login. Every message from finance routed around me. Every project I had history with was suddenly reassigned. If someone wanted to erase a person without making it obvious, this was how you do it. But what hurt more than the access cuts was how quickly people adjusted. Not maliciously, just instinctively, like animals moving away from a crack in the ice. One colleague, Jenna, a senior analyst I've shared hundreds of late nights with closing monthly books, stopped by my desk with a tight smile. "How's the new setup treating you?" New setup, as if I had chosen it. I shrugged. "It's fine." She hesitated. I rarely saw her hesitate. "Just stick close to your task for now. Things are shifting." That was all she said before she left. But I heard everything she didn't say. Someone had told her to keep her distance. Someone made it clear that my name had become radioactive. Still, even with the isolation, I kept working. Not for the company, not for Rick, but for clarity. Because the more I traced Ridgeline's adjustments, the more I realized something I genuinely wasn't prepared for. Rick wasn't smart enough to build this. He could route approvals, yes. He could delete a flag. He could wipe a small section of an audit log if someone showed him where the button was. But the pattern was too consistent, too precise, too controlled. Someone above him was orchestrating this. That realization wasn't empowering. It was terrifying. The next sign came disguised as something harmless, a calendar invite. Risk review, special session, 30 minutes. It came from my old team distribution list. I wasn't supposed to be on that list anymore. The invite landed at 6 p.m., long after most people left. That was my first warning. The second was the meeting's location, a small training room on the 3rd floor, far from our normal conference spaces. That was not an accident. Rick was already inside when I arrived. He stood when I walked in, surprised I even showed up. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure I was supposed to." He gestured stiffly to a chair. "This won't take long." I sat across from him, watching his jaw tighten. "You've been digging," he said. It wasn't a question. "I've been doing my job." He exhaled sharply. "This isn't your job anymore." There it was, the quiet confession. "What's going on, Rick?" He didn't answer, or maybe he didn't know how. Instead, he opened a folder, an actual printed folder, and slid a paper toward me. It was a performance review, not mine, a draft of 1. Under areas of concern, someone had written, difficulty adapting to role boundaries, misalignment with management expectations, repeated unsolicited involvement in restricted workflows, potential instability under pressure. My hands went cold. This wasn't about performance. This was a narrative being pre-written. "Where did this come from?" I asked. Rick didn't blink. This will go to HR if you keep pushing into processes you're not cleared for. Cleared for? I repeated. I built half of them. That's exactly the problem. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said something so revealing, so reckless, I'm certain he didn't mean to let it slip. You don't understand the pressures at my level. It was the way he said it, fear wrapped in pride, that made the truth snap into place. He wasn't covering up his own mistake. He was carrying someone else's. A director, or someone with director-level access. The missing audit logs, the nighttime edits, the overridden flags, the fact that Ridgeline's increases were exact multiples. Rick wasn't the architect. He was the shield. What did they promise you? I finally asked quietly. Rick's face froze. His eyes flicked away, just for a second, but enough. That was the moment I realized he wasn't my enemy. He was a man trapped in between, too scared to climb down, too exposed to climb up. The folder between us suddenly felt heavier than paper. It felt like a warning. Stop pulling threads, Rick said, before something snaps. He stood and walked toward the door. But as he reached for the handle, he added without turning, You're not the only one who kept a copy. He left me with that line, a threat wrapped as advice. I didn't move for a full minute. Every instinct told me to back off, walk away. Let this become someone else's problem. But that sentence stayed in my head. You're not the only one who kept a copy. A copy of what? The models? The logs? The approvals? Or something worse? Something Rick didn't even understand. When I finally left the room, a thought hit me so sharply I stopped mid-hallway. If someone above Rick was moving money through Ridgeline, then someone above Rick would eventually need a scapegoat. And they had already started writing my file. I didn't know it then, but that was the night I stopped waiting for justice. I started preparing for it. The shift didn't happen with a dramatic email or a confrontation in front of HR. It happened quietly, almost elegantly, like someone pulling stitching out of a suit from the inside. Every thread held until suddenly nothing did. The first tear came on a Thursday morning. At 8:17 a.m., I received an auto notification. Variance alert, Ridgeline Analytics. I shouldn't have been on that alert list anymore. Rick had removed me 3 weeks earlier. My first thought wasn't suspicion, it was curiosity. And then when I opened the file, curiosity turned into something colder, a new variance, larger than anything I'd seen so far, just above 1.9 per. Normally, a variance that large would trigger a cross-department review, a pause on vendor payouts, and an immediate compliance escalation. None of that had happened. Only one person had approved it. One signature. One name. Director Aaron Coyle. A name I had suspected but never had proof for. Rick wasn't covering for himself. He was covering for Coyle. But what made the variance terrifying wasn't the amount. Though 1.9 pars is the kind of mistake that ruins careers, it was the pattern beneath it. 2 adjustments, each routed through a shadow approval queue I had never seen before. A queue only someone at Coyle's level could create. And then I saw the timestamp. 2:11 a.m. The same time as the earlier missing logs. The same time as the overridden flags. The same timestamp that kept appearing whenever something was manipulated. Patterns don't lie. At 2:11 a.m., someone was editing the system with director-level access, and only one director benefited from these changes. But I couldn't confront anyone. Not yet. Not when I knew the narrative Rick handed me in that draft review was already being positioned behind closed doors. They were preparing to bury me before I could speak. I needed something stronger than numbers. Numbers can be spun. Numbers can be reframed. Numbers don't defend you, but logs do. Because audit logs aren't opinions. They are machine-stamped events that even executives can't erase without leaving a trail. And I still had my offline backup. The one I had created months before Rick removed my access. The one containing the original warnings, unmodified baselines, and the early sequence before the corrections began. For the next 48 hours, I barely slept. I rebuilt the entire pattern from scratch. Each ridgeline spike, Each approval rewrote, each timestamp anomaly, each deleted flag, each missing log entry. In the early version, before Coyle touched it, every thread led to the same place. There was no operational drift. This was coordinated manipulation. Not to steal money outright, I never found a direct siphon, but to inflate vendor usage to justify a larger budget line for next quarter. A bigger budget line meant more power, more resources, more headcount, more justification for Coyle's promotion. The Ridgeline spikes weren't fraud, they were ambition and Rick. Rick was the loyal soldier doing whatever his boss needed. By Sunday night, I had mapped everything in one long, meticulous document, a timeline so clean that even someone who had never read a variance report could follow every step. But that wasn't enough. I needed something irrefutable. So I went back to the one place no one expects an analyst to look, the system scheduler. Every 2:11 a.m. entry aligned with a scheduled maintenance window, an authorized time when edits could be masked under system updates. That meant someone wasn't breaking the rules. They were using the rules. No rogue access, no hacking. It was a structured manipulation disguised as routine maintenance. That was the break I needed. Not because it was scandalous, but because it was defensible. If I walked into HR with Coyle manipulated the system, they'd say I misunderstood. If I walked into legal with Rick deleted flags, they'd say I lacked context. If I walked into compliance with variance patterns look suspicious, they'd say I was overstepping. But if I walked into the CFO's office with someone is using maintenance windows to alter financial baselines without cross-approval, everything changed, because that wasn't a story. It was a liability with her name on it. I didn't plan what happened next. It happened to me. On Monday morning, sitting at my desk, staring at a spreadsheet I could no longer modify, I made a decision I never thought I'd make. I emailed the CFO, not a complaint, not an accusation, just a question. Hi, Lauren. Can you confirm whether director-level modifications during maintenance windows require cross-department approval under the updated policy? That was it. A neutral question. A procedural question. A question someone like me should have no reason to ask unless I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to see. 7 minutes later, my phone rang. Not Teams, not email, my actual phone. Grant, this is Lauren. Come to my office. Now. When I walked in, she wasn't alone. Compliance, internal audit, and a senior counsel from legal. Rick was not invited. Coyle was not invited. Lauren closed the door. Sit, she said. And then she asked the question she had asked once before, the same question that opened everything. What did you see? This time, I didn't freeze. I didn't hesitate. I didn't soften anything. I told her everything. The flags, the variances, the maintenance windows, the approvals rerouted, the missing logs, the inconsistent access patterns, the reshuffled workflows, the narrative Rick was preparing, every detail, every pattern, every timestamp. And then I placed my offline backup on the table, a quiet thud that sounded louder than any accusation. The room went still. Lauren didn't look shocked. She looked disappointed. Not in me. In the fact that she already knew Coyle was sloppy. But she didn't know it was this bad. When I finished talking, she asked just one question. Does anyone else have copies? I nodded once. Rick! Lauren exchanged a look with compliance that told me something was about to break open. Hard. She stood. Stay available, she said. Do not talk to Rick. Do not talk to Coyle. Do not access any vendor files. And if anyone asks you what we discussed, you say you don't know. I left the office without understanding the magnitude of what I'd done. I thought I had just reported a policy violation. A serious one, but still just a violation. I didn't realize until later that I had set off a chain reaction that would strip every lie down to the bone. And the first person to feel the impact wasn't Coyle. It was Rick. People imagine corporate justice as dramatic. Security badges disabled, cardboard boxes filled under fluorescent lights, whispered goodbyes near the elevators. The truth is quieter, colder, more methodical. The fallout didn't hit all at once. It rolled through the building in waves, each one hitting harder than the last. The first wave came Tuesday morning. I arrived at the office early, partly out of habit, partly because I needed distance from the previous day. My desk was exactly as I left it, but the atmosphere wasn't. 3 directors were already in before 9. That never happened unless something had gone structurally wrong. I logged in, more out of routine than hope, and blinked when I saw my permissions. All my old dashboards were back, the risk tools, the variance reports, the vendor reconciliation chains, restored silently, without explanation. Someone had reversed Rick's cuts. Before I could process it, a message popped up in the corner of my screen. Please come to 18B. Lauren. Not ASAP. Not urgent. Just 8 characters. But those 8 characters meant something had already begun. When I walked into conference room 18B, the first thing I saw was Rick. He wasn't sitting. He wasn't pacing. He looked suspended, like a man caught between 2 floors of an elevator, knowing whichever way it moves, he'll be crushed. Compliance sat opposite him, internal audit beside them, legal at the end of the table. Lauren adjusted her glasses and said calmly, Grant, thank you for coming. Please sit. Rick didn't look at me, not once. Lauren began without preamble. We conducted a preliminary review last night. Certain actions taken by Director Coyle appear to violate our maintenance and approval protocols. Appear. Corporate language for, We already know exactly what happened, but we'll document it before we say it outright. Some of those actions, she continued, were facilitated by changes made at the manager level. Everyone in the room looked at Rick, except Rick. He swallowed. Not loudly, but enough that I heard it. Then Lauren turned to me. Your documentation was thorough. It has been forwarded to the investigation team. I nodded. She didn't smile, but her tone warmed just slightly. You did the right thing. There it was. Recognition. Not praise. Not victory. Just acknowledgement. But for someone who had spent weeks being erased, it felt like oxygen. Rick exhaled shakily, as if the air itself betrayed him. Lauren continued. As of this morning, you are reassigned to audit support for the duration of the review. All access is restored. Audit support wasn't a demotion. It was protection. You don't isolate someone in audit unless they're a witness. Rick finally spoke. Lauren, I didn't alter those numbers. I did what I was told. You know how pressure works at my level. Lauren didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Your level carries access, she said. Access carries accountability. The room stayed silent after that. 5 minutes later, they dismissed me. Rick wasn't dismissed. He stayed behind. I didn't see him leave the room, but I later learned he walked out an hour later with a shake in his hands, so visible people assumed he was sick. He wasn't sick. He was exposed. The second wave hit the next afternoon. Director Coyle was supposed to lead a quarterly planning session. 50 people were waiting on Zoom. He never joined. 10 minutes later, a blanket email went out. Effective immediately, Director Aaron Coyle is on administrative leave pending internal review. That was corporate for, he's done, but we're finishing the paperwork. But what happened next surprised even me. Someone from audit, someone I barely knew, stopped by my desk, lowered her voice, and said, That backup file you kept, it saved us a month of work. I didn't know what to say. You built your models clean, she continued. It made the manipulations obvious. Good analysts don't do that accidentally. It wasn't praise, it was respect. And respect in corporate life is currency. The third wave didn't arrive until Friday. The building felt heavy all morning. People whispered in hallways. 2 HR managers walked past with folders stacked like funeral programs. At 11:32 a.m., security appeared on our floor. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. It's strange how fast offices evolve. 3 weeks earlier, I had felt like a man quietly drowning. Now people were glancing at me with something different in their eyes. Not pity, not fear. Recognition, as if they finally remembered I existed. Security headed straight toward the manager's row. I didn't stand, but I didn't need to. The whole floor froze. Rick stepped out of his office before they even reached him. His shoulders slumped, not in defiance, not in anger, but like someone who had been carrying weight that was never his. They walked him out, quiet, no handcuffs, just procedure. Even then, I didn't feel triumph. Rick was a coward, yes, but not a villain. He chose survival over integrity. Many do. Coyle, however, the ambition, the manipulation, the arrogance, he knew exactly what he was doing, and he underestimated the wrong analyst. The final wave came Monday. Lauren called me into her office. On her desk was a printed memo. "Grant," she said, "we reviewed the findings. Audit confirmed your assessment. The board has been briefed." My heart didn't race. It didn't need to. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means you're cleared," she said. "Entirely." She slid the memo toward me. "And it means we're expanding the risk and analytics team." I stared at her, not understanding. Then she added, "We're opening a senior role, the kind Rick used to have. If you're interested, I suggest you apply before end of week." For a moment, I couldn't speak, not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted a promotion, but because the one thing they tried to take from me, my credibility, was handed back without me begging for it. I finally managed. "Why me?" Lauren leaned back, choosing her words with precision. "Because when everyone else looked away, you didn't. Because your work didn't depend on permission. And because the person who had the answer to a 9.4 mark question was you." It wasn't flattery. It was fact. I walked out of her office with a strange, quiet calm. The kind you feel after a long storm, the kind you don't notice ending until the sun is already out. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just went back to my desk, opened a blank document, and began drafting my application for the senior role. The same role Rick used to say I wasn't ready for. I finished the application, hit send, and closed my laptop. Then I sat still for a moment, letting everything settle. Not satisfaction, not pride, just peace. Because sometimes the real revenge isn't watching someone fall. It's watching yourself stand up again, without anyone's permission. And for the first time in months, I realized something simple. I was finally back in my lane. My lane. Not the one they tried to bury me in, the one I built myself.